3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running.
There is no other institution that has the ability, uniquely,
without a heritage, every generation starts over.
Ask not
to remind the current regime
what your country...
We, the people, tell the government what it is allowed to do.
to get back in their box and stay there.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
From the Heritage Foundation, this is Heritage Explains.
When the new Constitution was proposed in 1787, not all of the great figures of the American founding were terribly thrilled. Some saw the new homegrown American government as potentially as bad as the British government they had overthrown. One such founding voice said the following: "Animated with the firmest zeal for the interest of this country, the peace and union of the American states, and the freedom and happiness of a people who have made the most costly sacrifices in the cause of liberty, who have braved the power of Britain, weathered the convulsions of war, and waded through the blood of friends and foes, to establish their independence and to support the freedom of the human mind, I cannot silently witness this degradation without calling on them, before they are compelled to blush at their own servitude and to turn back their languid eyes on the lost liberties, to consider that the character of nations generally changes at the moment of revolution." It was sentiments like these that eventually led to the passing of the Bill of Rights, an effort to further curtail the power of the federal government. These eloquent words were not those of Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, or Thomas Jefferson. In fact, they were not written by a founding father, or any kind of father, for that matter. They were written by Mercy Otis Warren, little-known playwright and writer whose thought informed much of the American Revolution and the years that followed. As Thanksgiving of 2024 nears, Brenda Hafera, Assistant Director of the Simon Center for American Studies here at the Heritage Foundation, thought it appropriate to reflect on Ms. Warren's thoughts, particularly those on gratitude. My colleague, Heritage Social Media Manager Christian Lasval, sat down with Brenda to learn about this little-known figure in American history.
Brenda Hafera, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
So briefly, tell us, what is it that you do here at the Heritage Foundation?
So I am the Assistant Director and Senior Policy Analyst of the Simon Center for American Studies, which is our American founding, American political shop, which I think is, of course, the most important and lovely shop to be in at Heritage. So most of my time is spent talking and thinking and writing about the American founding and its importance, and sometimes defending it, which is unnecessarily the case that it needs to be defended, but it's important to do so.
And that ties perfectly into our discussion today in your piece for Thanksgiving titled "A Drop of Mercy on Thanksgiving," centered around gratitude, but within the framing of the American founding, which is what you do here. Mm-hmm. So do tell us a little bit about why you wanted to write this piece and what the American founding, or the importance of the American foundings, fitting into this story on gratitude.
Yes. So it's called A Drop of Mercy on Thanksgiving because I wanted to talk about Mercy Otis Warren, who is a lesser known of the founding mothers, and she's very, very interesting. So it's unfortunate that she's kind of been lost to us. So Mercy Otis Warren was born in 1728. So she's towards the earlier generation of the founders. Franklin's born in 1706 and Madison is born in 1751, to kind of situate her in time. And she is a member of two very important political families in Massachusetts. She's an Otis, so her father was a delegate to the Massachusetts House of Representatives, and her brother was quite famous, James Otis. He stands up in court and argues against the general writs of assistance, which were basically general search warrants that Americans were smuggling all the time in early America. And the British decided to finally crack down on it. So they passed these general writs of assistance, which meant that British troops could, without particular evidence, go through ships and warehouses and those sorts of things to see if there were smuggled goods. And James Otis rails against this in court, and it's a very pivotal moment. John Adams writes that then and there, the child of independence was born, right? And we see, of course, that makes its way into the Fourth Amendment, right? Illegal searches and seizures. So Mercy is part of this family growing up, and then she marries James Warren, who's becomes Speaker of the House of Massachusetts. And they used to call their house the breeding place for the revolution, because the Sons of Liberty were passing in and out of it all the time to plot and plan resistance. And she's situated in the midst of all this, and she becomes a writer. So she starts writing political plays and poems that appear on the front pages of newspapers to really just drum up support of the patriot cause. So they're not really plays in the sense that we would think of them. They're not lengthy with these plot developments. They're really kind of pamphlet literature. They're with these lines like "the man dies well who sheds his blood for his country." Those sorts of things, right? So it's really political writings, and plays weren't performed in Boston. So she's writing these things under pseudonyms to further, because she's a patriot. So it's poems and plays. And then she writes observations on the new Constitution. She becomes an anti-federalist, arguing and critiquing the Constitution, most notably because it doesn't have a Bill of Rights, which was a common criticism, or standing army. She has a number of criticisms. And then finally, her largest work is a history of the American Revolution in 3 volumes. And it's the only anti-federalist account that we have, and one of the few written by a contemporary. So she's an incredibly important figure.
And one that most people don't know about, to your comment at the beginning on the importance of our history, she played a key role in the early American Revolution, and her name is not often shared in the history books, despite her significant contributions. Now, the tie-in for her in this piece is obviously her writing on gratitude and the reflection that as Americans today, we should make on her assessment of gratitude, and why that's extremely important for us to do as well. Tell us a little bit about her assessment on gratitude, its significance to the American Revolution and to the new nation, the United States at that time, and what you believe that tie is for the American in 2024 that ties us quite intimately to 1776.
Yeah, absolutely. So not just in Mercy Otis Warren, but a lot of the original documents from the founding, they really have a sense that they are making these sacrifices and doing what they're doing, not only for themselves, but for their children, for their posterity. And there's a sense that they have an obligation because they have received a gift from previous generations. They live in freedom because of what generations before them had done. And they feel so grateful and fortunate to do that, and actually think that it's a duty to maintain the experiment in self-government that the founding generation establishes for the sake of later generations. So this obligation and the sense of duty actually becomes a connecting chain between generations of Americans, which ties us to those past generations as well, if we choose to accept it, right? So I think it's incredibly important. And Mercy Otis Warren, particularly in her history, she bookends her history with quotes and discussions on gratitude, the first chapters and the ending chapters. And Mercy Otis Warren becomes very concerned just after the revolution that the spirit of greed and avarice is kind of taking over in America. They're too concerned with self-interest, commercialism, at the risk of the common good. And that's really important because, of course, a republic depends on a virtuous citizenry. She is alike on many of the founders on that account. So at the beginning of her history, she writes about this problem of avarice and says that it leads to forgetfulness. She says that, and thus the inhabitants of America cease to look back with due gratitude and respect on the fortitude and virtue of their ancestors. So she's worried about this. She's worried that sort of the memory of the revolution is going to fade. And I think she sees her work, of course, as preserving that. And it's important because gratitude is a virtue like any other. And it's something that's very important to maintain in America because America's so unique in that it's based around these principles. And those are the principles that she's trying to preserve. And at the end of her history, she's very much writing with an eye towards the youth of saying, this is going to be turned over to you, and it depends on you to maintain. It depends on your choices.
Obviously, hearing you say that and recounting Mercy's writings, it makes one think of the youth today and the education system that, especially in our American universities, aren't teaching American children, American young adults to love the values of America's founding, to preserve this republic for another generation. In fact, they're teaching students by and large to hate the experiment. What do you think about the American in 2024, our ability? Do you worry that our generation isn't remembering these important lessons, the sacrifices that came from those before us, and risking tarnishing this American experiment, this nation and practice of liberty for generations to come? Do you worry about that? And how do you think we might be able to change course? To end on the optimistic side that Mercy always did, having gratitude for our future.
Yes, unfortunately, I think I'm very worried about that. And I think a lot of people are, and with good reason. There are so many projects out there that it's a deliberate attack on the origin story of America, right? The 1619 Project got a lot of play, but it's kind of funny when the 1619 Project came out, the Southern Poverty Law Center basically responded to that and said, yeah, we've been doing this for a long time. They have their teaching tolerance curriculum, which has been rebranded. But there are a lot of these sorts of narratives that are going on. And they're, one, totally inaccurate, and two, very insidious. So the narrative of these folks is that America is tainted from the beginning, right? That literally they say that slavery is not only our original sin, but our origin, and that the revolution was fought in order to maintain slavery. So instead of America being this place that sets forth this principle, all men are created equal, and sets forth this new experiment in self-government that had never been done. And the American story is a constant moving towards this principle, however imperfectly, and despite all the setbacks, which of course are there, but it has this noble mission that it's creeping towards. The 1619 Project narrative is very different in that it's completely tainted, and it's sort of it needs to be given up on. That's kind of the message that is being told to the young. And it's very, very disheartening, both for the individual and for the country. I mean, one of the reasons Mercy Otis Warren is so concerned with gratitude and ingratitude is a very ugly vice, right? We intuitively see it. We really try to drum into our children, of course, that they should be grateful. Because when we see ingratitude, it's like, there's nothing quite like it, right? She says that the Persians, Mercy Otis Warren was a student of ancient history. She says that they believed that it wasn't possible for an ungrateful man to love the gods or even his parents, friends, or country. So it breaks down the most important of human bonds. So I think when we replace the origin story of America, it's not only dangerous for America as a country, it's dangerous for the character of the individual.
When speaking about virtues that were true to the American founding, virtues that the founding mothers like Mercy thought were vital to the republic, the new republic, and then preserving it there onward, what are some of the ones that you think are most in jeopardy today, that the American maybe isn't as aware of or is losing hope in, that as individual citizens we can help restore?
The virtues?
The virtues. Mm-hmm.
I think courage is probably a big one. And that's something that we learn not only from studying American history, but from having a perspective of world history. Live not by lies, right? That actually it's really true that the best system we have depends on the choices of individuals. And that incurs a high duty on those individuals, right? That you actually have an obligation to speak out when there's falsity happening. And it will especially in our modern environment with social media, it will snowball very quickly. But the risk and also the hope there is that it really takes one person. It takes one person to kind of stand up and say the emperor has no clothes, and it tends to then everyone else starts to speak out. And so the reason that cancel culture is allowed to thrive, a part of that is because we lack courage today. And we're not willing to say the thing that we know is true in our hearts because of a fear of our reputation. And fair enough, like cancel culture is vicious, right? It's sort of understandable that people don't want to say something, but we need that courage.
And tying Mercy back into the picture, since she is the central figure in this article that you wrote, talk to us about the risks that she faced when she was writing this stuff. For multiple reasons, because I know there are multiple, I'll let you explain those. But tell us about the courage that she had to have to do this, because we know that she reaped the reward, but she didn't know that when she was writing all of this stuff, when she was calling out the British Empire. Talk to us about the risk and the courage necessary from her to write all the things she did.
Sure. I mean, her and everyone else, they were risking being traitors, right? And they knew it, right? They're risking their sacred honor. They're risking everything. And so that's part of it. And Mercy Otis Warren, I don't know if it's fair to say it's a risk, but it's certainly unorthodox what she's doing, because she's, of course, a woman writing about these things, and she wrote mostly anonymously and under pseudonyms. The first work she published under her own name was a work of poetry that she dedicated to George Washington, who she knew. She knew everybody. And then her history, it took over 10 years for her to get it published, because a female historian was just an anomaly, right? And luckily, she has some very good friends, and her husband was very encouraging of her writing. John Adams was very encouraging. They were good friends. They had a falling out at one point, but he often aided in publishing her writings. But it took a lot of courage for her to stand up, as it did for all the revolutionaries, against the greatest military in the world. There was absolutely no guarantee that the American revolutionaries were going to win the war, and it was highly unlikely. And Mercy notes that in her writings a lot and talks about the role of Providence, right? That it seems bizarre that Americans are able to succeed, both militarily, and also that a republic over an extended territory had never existed before. So many of the founders, Mercy herself included, were students of the ancients, and it was considered common knowledge that republics needed to be small so that you could aggregate the voice of the people, right? But there's this challenge in America now because there are all these large countries, and a republic can't survive on the international stage. It will be conquered. And so trying to have a republic over an extended territory is something very new. And Madison really figures it out, how to do it. But Mercy is sort of, it's unlikely we'll win this war. It's unlikely we'll be able to establish a republic. And there seems to be a role of Providence here, and that the implications that America's success will have implications not only for America itself, but for mankind, and could be part of a greater plan at work.
And we certainly have a lot to be grateful to her and to all the founders and all of the revolutionaries for their sacrifice and their courage, and tying it into everybody's Thursday evening dinner for Thanksgiving. What would be your message to them, inspired by what you've written in this piece and the lessons that Mercy tried to convey in her writing? What takeaway do you want the listener to have as they gather around their dining room table to celebrate Thanksgiving this year?
I think the study of history gives you a perspective on how miraculous the existence of America really is, and that you are so fortunate to be part of that. It's an invitation that you have the opportunity to accept or reject. And that's a weighty thing, right? And there's a sense, I think, once you look back and realize that that your prosperity and your fortune is not entirely of your own making. And it brings you out of your ego. Now, of course, we believe in meritocracy, and obviously your efforts make a difference. But the system that we are in and the prosperity that we enjoy is the result of the sacrifice of so many generations that came before us and willingly gave it to us. And we owe our very character to them. And that's something that we'll never be able to fully repay because it's such an immeasurable thing. It's such a wonderful thing. But we have an obligation to strive to do so.
I think that's an excellent note to end on. Brenda Hafera, thank you very much for joining us. And to all of our listeners, please make sure to check out her latest piece, A Drop of Mercy on Thanksgiving, for your Thanksgiving holiday. Thanks so much for being here and listening in to this episode of Heritage Explains.
Thank you to Christian Lasval and Brenda Hafera for their contributions to today's episode. You can follow Christian on X at Christian Lasval. You can find more about Brenda's work, including her paper on Mercy Otis Warren, at heritage.org. And of course, thanks as always to you for listening to Heritage Explains. As always, you can reach out to us with any thoughts, questions, or suggestions at heritageexplains@heritage.org. From all of us at the Heritage Foundation, happy Thanksgiving. Take care. We'll see you next week.
Heritage Explains is written and produced by Mark Gagne, Lauren Evans, and John Popp.